What is good, Foundation Nation? We're here today with a review of the Prodigy Distortion. This is something new in the Kevin Jones line. Let's get into it. All right, so Prodigy's been coming out with these signature lines of discs. Essentially, they're a little bit separate from their typical, series. This disc in particular would have fit into their A series. But they're giving Kevin Jones. We've also seen Kale with some signature discs as well. So this Distortion is the approach disc coming from in the KJ line. And I'm gonna be completely straight up with you. When you get this in your hand, it screams zone. So that's actually the disc we're gonna be comparing it to today. But feel-wise, it feels like kind of like the goal for approach discs. Not too deep. I'm actually very curious to get the calipers out and see what the depth is actually looking like. Not too deep. Rim width is very comfortable. They have it listed at a 4-speed. For these reviews, we're just strictly going off caliper measurements, so we're not listening to any disc speed or anything like that. And yeah, it feels just like a very solid, overstable disc. I haven't seen any come out with a dome in the runs that we've gotten. Whether or not that's a possibility, I don't know, but they've all been board flat, which is exactly what you're looking for in an overstable approach disc like this. Feels comfortable backhand, feels comfortable forehand. I'm very excited to get out and throw it. It's only been made, as far as my knowledge, the stock ones at least, in this 400 plastic, which if you're new to Prodigy is kind of their like Champ Z-esque plastic, but a little bit more grip than you'll get in either of those. Not gonna factor the plastic into the feel, but the mold wise, absolutely love the feel. And so let's go ahead, we're gonna measure this with the calipers, see what the width and height's looking like, and we'll measure that directly in correlation with the zone here. And then when we're out in the field, we're gonna throw them next to each other a little bit. So if you've thrown a zone, you can see what to expect out of a Distortion, or if you're kind of trying to decide between the two, you can see the differences there, but let's go ahead and measure them. All right, so we're looking at 11.8 on the rim width for the Distortion. Let's see how that compares to the rim width of the zone here. And we're looking at 11.84 on the rim width for the zone. So for all intents and purposes, identical when it comes to that. Let's go ahead and look at the height. So the height, when I'm talking here, is this portion right here, basically the highest part of the disc to the shoulder here. We're not gonna factor in any dome, but how tall this part of the disc is. We're gonna go ahead and measure that on the Distortion here first. Looking at 17.42 millimeters on the Distortion and 16.5 on the zone here. So the Distortion's essentially almost a millimeter taller than the zone, which will be interesting to see how that correlates to flight out in the field. Feel-wise, now that I know that, I can tell, I can see it. But when I was holding it beforehand, not something you really notice. You can tell it's a little deeper, mainly like when I'm in my forehand grip, there's a little sliver here, versus in the zone, there's not exactly too much. But they both fully cover my finger, so that's something that I don't notice, and it's not deep enough that it's uncomfortable. So that's definitely interesting that there is that slight difference between the Distortion and the zone. We'll see how that affects the flight in the field. All right, so first one out here is flat. It's definitely a little nose up, but you can see it's still plenty stable to handle that. Throwing an overstable approach disc on Anhyzer never is really gonna tell you too much, because these discs, basically, they don't wanna flip up. So this next line here is the important one. The Anhyzer here definitely comes out on a slight Annie, which is typically tough for me, but notice the flight here, how much the way it fades there. It's more of a forward pushing fade, versus when we look at the zone here, the zone starts that fade a little earlier and gets to the ground a little bit quicker, and that's very noticeable here on a forehand with clear Annie. Just never wants to get all the way back to the right. All right, back in studio after throwing the Distortion, comparing it to the zone, getting some good feel for it out there. Before we get into too much of the rating and stuff like that, the Distortion's a great disc. Nothing inherently wrong with the Distortion, but my one qualm with it is it's a little less stable than I expected it to be. When I got out in the field, I threw it next to the zone. I've thrown plenty of, even from them, like the A2, A1's a whole different category, Justice is a whole different category, but like the Heart, the Zone, what I personally bag, the Entropy, this is just a tick less stable than all of those. But the feel, the look, and everything about it makes you think it's going to be that disc. So I did have a little bit of an issue with that. But with that being said, it is plenty overstable. It is, for the majority of players out there, majority of shots you're throwing with it, you're not gonna have too much of trouble. You're able to put it on Anhyzer, it's gonna get to flat and come back a little bit. It's just not gonna do that as quickly as some of the other discs on the market that are in this exact same category. So a little bit surprised to see there, but let's go ahead and get straight into the actual rating of this disc. Feel-wise, I'm gonna give it an 8.5. I did notice when I got in the field and threw it more and more, the increased depth of it I did start to notice that, and it's a little deeper than I personally would like. And so I think that it's something that a lot of people can be confident with, a lot of people really like, but yeah, I'm going with an 8.5 for the feel of this disc. Great, just personally not exactly what I'm looking for, so that's why I'm gonna bring it down a little bit, but for you it could be. Now, the flight wise of this disc, how it actually flew, this is where, like I was saying, I had some issues just because with the feel, with how it, you feel it, you pick it up, you look at it, how you think it's gonna fly versus how it actually flew was a little surprising to me. And also I think that it's a hair too straight to really fill that good zone entropy harp type slot, but it's also not straight enough to be that like A4, Ringer GT super straight slot. So it kind of falls in between. I'm sure there's gonna be some runs that are more overstable than this one that I threw that would fit more that zone slot, but this one in particular, I mean, it was still overstable. So you saw the videos, you watched it, it's just a tick less overstable than you would expect. And straight out of the box, if that's what it's already doing, when it gets beat in, it's gonna get to straighter quicker, which for me, a disc like this, I don't think that's what a lot of people are looking for when they pick this up. I think people would want it to be more overstable, and I'm the one personally doing this review, and I want it to be more overstable, so I'm giving it a 7 for the flight, 7 out of 10. Again, there isn't anything inherently wrong with the flight, and it does do what's advertised, as we're about to get to the next category. But when you have a disc in this category, I think it's just expected and almost like unspoken that it's gonna be a little more stable than this one turned out. So true to advertise, they just call it an overstable approach disc, super vague. It doesn't really talk much about how overstable that's going to be. But like I said, when we're fitting in this category, there's a standard on the market already out there. So I'm not gonna knock it too much in that category, because if you just read the words and you have no basis for any other like expectations, it's a 10 out of 10 there. But with the standard that's already on the market and it doesn't quite fit that, I'm gonna go with 8 out of 10 for true to advertise, which when you bring all of those together, that brings the overall score for the Distortion to a 7.8 out of 10. Very solid disc, very solid approach disc. And if you love the feel of Prodigy's plastic and you're looking for that zone type disc, this is it. This is as close as you can get within that category. I don't think it's quite as overstable as the zones, the harps, the Sake Bomb slammers, the entropies, that type of category, but it's overstable enough to get the job done. If that's what you're looking for, you love the Prodigy plastic, you love the feel, maybe you want something a little deeper than your zone, this disc is it. So don't let the 7.8 overall scare you in any ways. I think there's a lot of people that this is a 10 out of 10 for them. It's just me personally and my expectations of an overstable approach disc don't quite line up with the Distortion. So great disc, not quite for me, 7.8 out of 10. We'll see you in the next one.